So when it comes to religious freedom in America, what is most alarming to you?
What alarms me right now is the fact that there are so many cultural elites who view religious people, people of faith, Christians and others, not only as wrong on kind of core cultural issues, but as dangerous and even bigoted. And when you think about it like that, you can see why it's almost like kind of throw the restraints off and attack these people because they're dangerous to society. That whole view of people of faith is it's pernicious, but it's extremely dangerous, and it makes religious freedom seem like a license to harm as opposed to a fundamental human right that should be protected and upheld.
Well, and it's particularly interesting and problematic when that lines up with a government narrative or, and I'm saying hypothetically,
Sure.
media, Hollywood, university. When you start to have a system where all of the educational spheres outside of churches are saying the same thing.
That's right.
That seems to be something that has happened to some degree and that I have found concerning, even covering these things. Even how Joe Kennedy was framed, the football coach, right? It was almost as though before he won his Supreme Court case, he's trying to destroy the First Amendment. I mean, I'm reading these headlines and I'm thinking, but no, that's a misconception, perhaps, of what he's trying to do.
That's right.
I don't know if you want to speak to that at all.
Sure. The ubiquity of these ideas in terms of kind of being embraced by leadership across these sectors that you just discussed, academia, entertainment, even in professional sports and NCAA sports, we've seen these ideas in so many sectors, corporate America, embraced in such a way that it pitches them in an adversarial way against people of faith because they've embraced these ideologies wholesale. And so it really is widespread. And that's part of the concern, because there's no way that elites across these many sectors could embrace these harmful ideologies without them eventually taking expression in law and being used in various political ways to the detriment of Christians and others.
Yeah, and it seems the way we even talk about things in this divisive culture, right? I mean, I would not assume as a Christian that somebody who's not a Christian is bigoted towards me because they don't agree with me, right? Based on, I don't agree with your beliefs, I love you, we're friends. I would never call that person a bigot, right? And so I think we have a dynamic where we do have to kind of reframe the conversation, because when you start to say that to people maybe who aren't Christians, like, hey, I wouldn't think that you were a bigot because you don't agree with me. I think they understand that. And so there's a broader conversation that can maybe happen there. But I do want to ask you, because we talked about the negative and what alarms you, what is encouraging to you right now in light of the state of religious liberty?
Yeah, there are a handful of things. One, at the Supreme Court, there really have been, in the last number of years, decisions that have vindicated the rights, the religious freedom rights of a variety of people. And these are good things. The Hobby Lobby case going back a number of years, the Little Sisters of the Poor eventually were vindicated, although they were dragged through the courts for a decade or more. There have been cases recently in which discrimination against religious schools by government actors has been, kind of dispensed with. You can't do that. You can't treat religious actors worse than you treat their secular counterparts. So there have been a number of cases. Catholic Social Services of Philadelphia the city told them, you cannot partner with us in foster care any longer because you won't make placements with same-sex couples, regardless of what your view on marriage is. Catholic Social Services was vindicated before the Supreme Court. So the problem is there's so much punishment in the process that even when they do get a good ruling in the end, there's a lot that came to it. And if a lot of public interest law firms, ADF and Beckett and others, didn't step up to help them along the way, some of these things could have been even more devastating. There are some other things too. People of faith generally, I think Christians in particular, are rediscovering the public dimensions of their faith. They're understanding that we cannot be passive, kind of in the face of things that are happening around us, and we need to bring to bear our convictions in the public square. This is a good thing. The Christian faith it's personal for everyone, but it should never be private. And so this is something that I think has been reinvigorated. One other place that I would point, at the state level, we've seen in the area of medical conscience rights, for instance, movement to embed within state law protections for doctors, nurses, pharmacists, even faith-based hospitals, to not be mandated, to be protected from having to provide services that they disagree with based on their deepest convictions about the nature of the human person and what is good for patients. Related to that, then patients also have providers that they can go to that they trust. So kind of both sides of the ledger get served by these kinds of laws. There are maybe 4 or 5 states in which these laws have really gotten traction. So this is a good thing. So there are good things happening amid towering challenges culturally and legally right now in the U.S.
You said something interesting there about, the cultural dynamics, the public dynamics of faith. And it does seem, and I won't ask you to comment on this, I will say it. I think we've retreated a lot from Hollywood and media and universities. And some of that is understandable, but there is a cost to that too.
Sure.
When there's nobody in the room, when you're making a conversation about what you're going to cover or what you're going to talk about, who's a Christian or who understands it. So there's a cost to that retreat. And I do think we're watching, in Hollywood in particular, a lot of believers come back in. A lot of people come back in and say, hey, we want to be present here. We want to create content that helps tell that story in a more public way.
Sure.
The First and the 14th Amendments, right? It seems like a lot of these battles are pitted between religious liberty, and then you have, obviously, the 14th Amendment, equal protection. And when you look at that debate, it seems a lot of people only want to focus on the equal protection part, and we sort of throw the First Amendment out. Why is it important that we have a balance and understand that both of those amendments obviously are important?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that those amendments applied in very different contexts. Now, they apply across the board now, but understanding how they emerged originally, the First Amendment at the founding, looking at religious persecution in Europe and wanting to make sure that this is not going to be a part of the American story is an important thing. Looking at when the 14th Amendment emerged in the wake of a country that was torn apart by war over slavery and racism and that sort of thing. So it's important to understand context, but I think the deeper philosophical issue that's going on is how do we understand the relationship between religious freedom and freedom generally over and against, well, it shouldn't be pitched against. I think they complement one another, but over and against the whole notion of non-discrimination and equality. And how do we understand how these two preeminent principles of the American tradition, freedom and equality, should interact with one another? And the problem is there are all kinds of category errors going on with how we apply these things, where people come to the conclusion, oftentimes, at least elites are, and that's why I want to keep pointing back to those who are leading culture-shaping institutions, those in government, those in legislatures, who have embraced the idea that equality is a particular kind of thing, and what equality means is equal affirmation of all ways of life should always kind of override liberty, even religious liberty. And that's a huge mistake. And it's never, well, one, it's not a workable solution in a pluralistic society, because all you're doing is picking winners and losers at that point in ways that are really, really harmful.
Why is religious liberty, just to drive this home, because I think it's incredibly important, the cornerstone of a healthy society?
Sure. Religious liberty, and scholars have pointed this out, practitioners understand it, people in government understand it, it is a catalyst for, it can serve as a fundamental kind of basis for other rights, freedom of speech and association and others. So it is an important way of understanding how to protect those rights. If you can protect a person, if you're obligated as a government to protect people's right to conscience, and conscience that's sort of rooted in the religious convictions, then it makes sense that you should also protect what they speak when they have out of that conscience they speak into the world, or when they act, or when they associate with other people. So it can be the basis for other rights. It also, in a pluralistic society like ours, I mean, no one would deny that America is highly diverse. We have lots of different ideas on really fundamental issues, and religious freedom can serve as an important tool for helping us to live amid that reality, to encourage us to convince one another of what we think is true, rather than calling on government to coerce one another in those matters, right? So I'll respect my Jewish and Muslim neighbors, and I want to engage with them, and I'm open to them trying to convince me. But religious freedom is a framework in which we can contend with one another. It's not about all religions being equally true, all ideologies being equally true. We don't believe that at all at RFI. We think all people are equal in dignity, and therefore should have the freedom to pursue religious truth.
That's powerful and true. Now, if you look ahead, and this is always difficult to do, but based on where we have come from, where we are now, the battles that are currently going on, what do you think is ahead for religious liberty in this battle in America?
Yeah, I think it's important to look ahead that in matters of jurisprudence in the courts, we will still get a mixed picture, but overall a good picture in terms of outcomes that vindicate the rights of religious people. And we have a solid court, and I think that's going to continue to happen, and we should be happy about that. But I would point out that every one of those cases that goes before the court represents a prior error and problem in that those cases were brought in the first place. So there are lots of issues that go into that. But as I look ahead, I would say we have cultural forces that are not going away anytime soon. And I don't ever want to simply be preoccupied with matters of human sexuality, but the reality is our culture is going in one direction with that, and that direction is entirely incompatible with what Christians understand to be true about marriage, sexuality, family formation, and all the rest. And so as that divergence continues, and this will be true for many Jews and Muslims and others, there is going to continue to be real problems that we have to contend with, and real pressure on religious freedom as a principle, because that will be the principle that allows people of faith to continue to be full participants in our society, or they won't be full participants, and we object to that strenuously. But religious freedom can help us work with that divergence as we, as Christians and others, appeal to their civic neighbors about the direction that we're going in a variety of areas that, we're trying to say, no, let's take this in another direction. So I foresee continued clouds on the horizon, dark ones, and all is never lost. Okay, there's lots of reason for hope. It is a mixed picture, but overall, the threats are real, and we need to take them very seriously.
And they are predominantly, unfortunately, focused on human sexuality, and those are the issues. When you have bakers and you have others being fined insane amounts of money, and you have these things going on, these are going to be where those battles are right now. I appreciate your time. Appreciate you breaking it down for us.
Yeah.